First of all, I would like to thank the organizing and scientific committee of this conference for inviting me to give this lecture on how climate crisis affects impact or the occurrence of new or emerging epidemics. And my presentation will follow actually Dr. Kalahani's presentation. I mean, he put some slides about epidemics and how the climate crisis affects those epidemics, but I will give you some more details and some recent data that have been published over the last 2 years. Let me see. Okay, before starting, here's my personal disclosure. Thank you. We have already seen this slide from Dr. Kalahani's. It's the history of the pandemics. As he already mentioned, we have, as far as we know, the human history, the humanity, we have faced several pandemics. Some of those that are aged like 3,000 or 4,000 years ago. And of course, as he already mentioned, during the last 2 centuries, during the last 120 years, we have a large number of epidemics, including the pandemic we faced over the last 3 years since November 19, the COVID-19 pandemic due to the novel SARS-CoV-2 coronavirus. And this is another example of how this is. Those 2 figures are from an online instrument that tries to infographic all the pandemics through the human history, and let's say the size of these fluffy balls is relevant to the deaths caused by those pandemics. As you can see, I would like to mention that the pandemic of HIV/AIDS that started nearly 40 years ago, back in 1981, and of course the COVID-19 pandemic that is actually still present, are still increasing. Those are, I don't know if you can see my pointer, is on the second, let's say, row, the first and the third one. So they are, both of them, they are in the top 10, and they are still increasing in terms that they are still causing deaths. And here is the history of the human population. Actually, a week ago, on 15th of November, humanity, our population, reached the number of 8 billion, and the increase of human population over the last 50 years, so let's say after the Second World War, we can see that nearly every 10 to 12 years, population, we are adding 1 billion human beings on this planet. And the projection is that we are going to reach 9 and probably 10 billion, the number of 10 billion by 2050. And here is another diagram that Dr. Kalahani showed us, is how the global temperature on the Earth, on this planet, is rising over the last 40 years, from, 200 years, from 18th century up to today, let's say, or last year. Several organizations, including the World Economic Forum, United Nations, and WHO, they have implemented their forces to not to actually revert the climatic change. They all agree that the climate crisis is already here and cannot revert it. So the efforts now are, let's say, they are putting together their efforts in order to reduce or eliminate the impact of this crisis, the impact of the changes that are caused, and we already face due to climatic changes. So the World Economic Forum states that that our try is to limit the rise of global temperature rise, because we cannot prevent the rise of global temperature. So we have to try to limit this rise instead of reverse the whole procedure. And of course, implement policies and strategies to stave off the disaster. It has been already recognized that we will face a lot of problems, including health-related problems due to the climatic crisis, and we have to stave off the disaster and try in the community to organize solutions in order to not to reduce the impact of those changes, including human health. There is an online tool from the World Economic Forum. They call it Strategic Intelligence tool, where for every problem, every situation, let's say, that we face in our planet, there is the areas that implementation should take action. And for climate change, as you can see, actually all the organizations, including public stakeholders, private organizations, of course, they always support private-public partnerships, should act together and organize together their actions in order to reduce the impact of climatic crisis that, as I said, already face. And in terms of future epidemics, like the one we faced over the last 3 years, once again, there must be collaborations, including clinical practice, clinicians, including improvement in diagnostic testings, vaccines, as the previous speaker mentioned, new therapeutics, innovation, including implementation of e-health and mobile health technologies in the surveillance of infectious diseases and the emergence of new epidemics. The IPCC, which is in the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change that has been, let's say, formulated several years ago, this year, a few months ago, before summer, released their 6th assessment, and they, in the panel, as you can see, they collaborate the WHO, the United Nations, the World Economic Forum, and other public and private stakeholders and collaborators. So in 2022, we already observed impacts to human health, as Dr. Kalahanis mentioned in the previous lecture. And among these impacts is an observed increase in heat-related mortality, which means deaths due to the increased temperature on the planet, and which has also contributed to the once again an observed expansion of mainly vector-borne diseases. Vector-borne diseases are those infectious agents that are transferred by mosquitoes from vectors. Vector can be bees, mosquitoes, and this kind of animals. But the most worrying thing is the projected risks on human health if we don't take action now. I mean, now in this year. So the projection risks on human health once again say that there will be a significant increase in deaths, including ill deaths and premature deaths. By 2050, there is a projection that we will have an excess of 200,000 deaths per year. Excess of deaths, as we know from the COVID pandemic, is deaths that were not, let's say, should not occur. And if we don't take action now, the excess deaths will be more than 250,000. In terms of epidemics, it is projected that several what we call climate-sensitive diseases, or climate-sensitive pathogens are the foodborne, waterborne, those that are food, water, and of course waterborne diseases. And all of them are projected to be increased under the climate crisis we already face, assuming no additional adaptation in our world. So there is a strong statement to take action now, not to reduce, as I said, the climate change, because it can be done now. We are at the point that we cannot reverse the climate change because the climate crisis is happening now. We are in the climate crisis. So it's unavoidable to have it. So all the policies, all the efforts, let's say, have to prepare communities and humanity to live with the global warming and avert the worst outcomes, so mitigate the outcomes. And this is the scientific evidence for this statement is unequivocal, so cannot be questioned, let's say, today. So following my presentation, I would like to show you some interesting publications that came out over the last 2 years. Here's one in PNAS last year. So here the scientists, they try to model the epidemics. So you can see the dates in this figure are all the epidemics the humanity faced over the last 3,000-4,000 years. And by modeling the projection of having new epidemics or new pandemics in the forthcoming years, they estimate that the likelihood of having an extremely infectious epidemic like the COVID-19 in the coming decades is 3 times higher than it used to be, let's say, 100 years ago. To make it more clear in numbers, all of us, everyone who is currently living on this planet, on Earth, it has about 38% possibility in his or her lifetime to face another epidemic. Not, once again, not the COVID-19, the one that we're already facing, another one. And this proportion is going even higher for young adults or teenagers, where the chance of facing another epidemic in their lifetime is going up to 60%. And the estimates show that those epidemics will be most of them, or the majority of them, will be pathogens, infectious agents that will come from animals, what we call zoonotic diseases, like the SARS-CoV-2. An example from the same work, from the same paper, an example is the Ebola epidemics. The Ebola epidemics, the diagram we both saw, Dr. Kalahanis and me, at the beginning of my presentation, so that we had 2 Ebola epidemics, one back in 2014 and another one in 2016. Is not correct. There is another epidemic that emerged by the end of 2021 and is about to finish or finished this summer. So we have a 3rd Ebola epidemic in sub-Saharan West Africa in late 2021 up to the mid 2022. And there is cumulative evidence that those epidemics have, all the 3 epidemics have arose due to the loss of forest in West Africa for the use of palm oil. Those African forests that have been destroyed for the palm oil industry, they used to be habitat for several species of bats, and when those forests have been destroyed, human persons, so Homo sapiens, came into interaction with those bat species, and that's how those 3 Ebola epidemics came into humans. Another work that came out earlier this year by Nature. So actually Nature publications, they have a special, not special issue, they have a special segment in all their journals that publish research relevant to climate crisis and climate change, not climate crisis. And here is a nice review that came out in early 22, summarizing the impact of climate change in year 2021. So in last year, in 2021, due to extreme weather conditions and climate events happen all over the planet, we face, as humanity, I mean, we face an increased number of preventable and unpreventable injuries that caused several deaths, and the burden of of these conditions, let's say, or climate events is projected to be increased over the next few years. Short-term future, which means in the next 3 to 5 years, the humanity will face a lot of health-related issues due to these climate events and changes to the climate. And countries and communities, once again, the review summarizes the same, must implement strategies to mitigate climate changes and to debate of worst outcomes from the worst outcomes on human health on this. From these events. And from the same publication, here is several, let's say, health-related conditions, including epidemics that can be caused from infectious agents like malaria, dengue, or other viruses, including West Nile fever virus and or Lyme or Lassa disease. And what this diagram shows is that even if we have the same, let's say, temperature on Earth for the upcoming year, there is from moderate to high and extremely very high impact on risk of having a new epidemic due to those pathogens. And before going to the summarizing my data, another publication, once again from the Nature Climate Change, let's say, scheme, nearly 60% of known pathogens, because they are not only the new pathogens that could be, let's say, a threat for evolving a new epidemic or a new pandemic in the forthcoming years, there is also the already known pathogens. So from the known, in this study, the authors, they studied 375 known pathogens and how those pathogens and their, let's say, infectivity could be affected by the climate change and the climate crisis we face. And they found out that nearly 60% of them are being affected by the changes in the climate. Here is the figure from this paper, and they have studied 10 let's say, different climate hazard, because it's not only the global warming that we can see here on the top, it's also storms, floods, and several other disasters that can be caused, or hazards, let's say, that can be caused due to the climatic crisis. And as you can see, the lines, the gray lines, all the climatic hazards are correlated with several vector-borne, waterborne, airborne, all kinds of borne infectious diseases, and all kinds of pathogens, including viruses, bacteria, protozoans, and other infectious agents. So, as Dr. Callahan said in his previous presentation, since 1900, so the last, say 120 years, we are facing a lot of pandemics, and 3 of those are still ongoing, as I mentioned. It's the HIV, the AIDS one, it's the Ebola pandemics, and of course, the COVID-19. The common characteristic of all these epidemics and or pandemics we face as humanity, I mean, we face over the last 1,200 years, are the infectious agent is an RNA virus, because RNA viruses, they have the capability of, let's say, adapting in new environments, new hosts, and that's how they are coming to humans. And why in humans? Here I have several viruses like influenza, HIV-related, coronaviruses. The answer is not, they are not only humans, they are also in other kind of species, in other animals, and the answer is and Homo sapiens. So these viruses, they are expanding, let's say, their environment, they are hosts by infecting humans, and that's how they spread. Just to, let's say, to merge my presentation with the next one that will follow from Professor Thomaidis, nowadays it's more clear than ever that the circulation, or let's say the emergence of new epidemics, is not due to a direct, let's say, spillover of an event from an animal or another host to the human. It's a circulation model that, let's say, exists in our Earth, on our Earth, and different pathogens, including RNA viruses and other pathogens, co-circulate within a human being and other, of course, animals. And that's why we have to surveil and we have to survey all the infectious agents and all the putative, let's say, infectious pathogen to cause another epidemic or pandemic under, let's say, under the scheme of One Health, including not only human beings, but also all the animals and all the environments. So before closing, to summarize, the climate change cannot be, I mean, the crisis is already here, it's happening now, so we cannot, let's say, go back. So the policies implementation, and we have to prepare ourselves and stakeholders to take action to decrease or reduce the, let's say, the worst outcomes that the crisis can cause on human health. Nowadays, it's 3 times higher the possibility of having a new epidemic or pandemic, a severe one, like similar to COVID-19. And this possibility is going to get higher in the coming decades. All of us, we have 40% chance facing another pandemic until in our lifetime. And on this planet, on our planet, human beings, I mean, we are coexist with the infectious pathogens amongst all the other animals, of course, and species. So interactions will always happen. And I would like to thank you for your attention. And I think questions will be at the end after Professor Thomaidis finishes his presentation as well. Thank you.